here in just a second. All right. Michael Jake, how are you, my man?
I'm good. How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing awesome. Guys, welcome to the Real Estate Investing Mastery Podcast. I'm Joe McCall, and this is part 2 of my interview with Michael Jake. Just interviewed him last week. So much I wanted to ask him and go over, and I said, hey, can we please do it in 2 parts? And he agreed, graciously agreed. Those of you that don't know Michael, he's been around in the business for a long, long time. I met him years ago. I've spoken at his, do you still lead that RIA, by the way, the Real Estate Club?
We're on Meetup pretty much at this point, and we're pretty much all virtual. But yeah, we still run it. We're kind of waiting until we can get back and meet in person. But
nice.
Yep, still running things there.
You've invited me to speak there twice, which is crazy, and I love any excuse to go out to Colorado Springs I can get. But all right, so part 1, we talked a lot about how Michael got started in the business, what he's doing today. He's got an impressive story of where he's kind of come from and where he's at today. How many doors do you own today, right now, and manage, Michael?
Our company, we're down to, I think, 48,
Okay.
with a high water mark internal of about 102. And then again, I think on the last show I mentioned I had a partnership with 30 some that we dissolved, and then I have about 26 or so in a Roth IRA type environment that I'm involved in.
So a total of how many?
I don't know, 80-ish, whatever that adds up to.
Okay. And over the last year or so, have you been selling some of your inventory, or you have been? Can you explain why?
I mean, at some point, I kind of had to relearn the basic plan I kind of signed up for. I think I'd mentioned on the last one, John Schaub had a pretty huge impact on me. And when I originally read his book, it was buy a house a year and wait for them to double. And when they double, if you can sell a house a year and have this massive chunk of equity to live on, and all you got to do is buy one house a year. And that I'm like, wow, that's like an incredibly simple plan that works. And then you kind of get mixed up in this world, and you realize, oh, it's probably easier to buy a house a month than it is to buy a house a year, because when you kind of set up all the business systems and the marketing systems, it's harder, in my opinion, to buy just one than it is to buy a crap ton of them. But at some point, once you have a crap ton of them, you get to the point where less is more. And I kind of slowly realized that, man, I don't need to be this busy. I don't need to be this hectic in my life. And again, I'm business partners with my wife. So the more hectic I am, the more hectic she is in magnitudes. So, the market here got fairly, like most places, got really competitive, and margins are bidding down. And at some point, it's just like, I'm good. I don't need to play. So
I've heard this from so many people, especially recently. Prices are going up, and people are like, do I really need 100 doors? Right? Like I could make the same cash flow. Yeah. You could make the same cash flow selling half of them and paying down your debt on the other half.
Absolutely.
With half the headaches and hassles.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't have the hassles of flipping or rehabbing. You still have, I guess you want to call it the hassles of owning rental properties. I mean, there is maintenance involved with that, but because we were rehabbers and flippers, we have a good team of people to do that. And we have less of them now, but we have a lot of people that we know, like, and trust, and we keep them busy, and we just have them doing different work now, basic maintenance stuff, and keeping the rental portfolio in good condition. And that's kind of it. And it's enough moving parts. And as you said, by selling a bunch of them and paying off debt, we actually, by having less houses, we actually have more cash flow, and we have less management, meaning there's less tenants to manage, there's less houses to manage, and things like that. So
what's your goal, Michael? If you don't mind me asking, you don't have to get too personal, but like, is your goal long-term wealth or cash flow to pay the bills today? A long-term, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's just sport at this point. I mean, we have plenty to live the rest of our lives. I don't need to work another day if I don't want to.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of try to help other folks locally learn the business, and I mean, I'm working deals right now. I mean, they just kind of fall in my lap, doing what doing what I have done, doing what I do with the real estate group, and so but I'm not running, huge marketing campaigns anymore. I'm not doing, I don't have an acquisitions team anymore. Just me and Lori, and we have 1.5 employees, predominantly that deal with the management side of things. And then, I participate in deals with my Roth, predominantly with people that I know, like, and trust locally that, I've hopefully corrupted their thinking to buy and hold, and that's predominantly where I do my IRA investing. Is I help people structural deals. I provide the cash needed, and I'm looking for growth in my IRA, as I was looking for growth outside of my IRA when I was building my portfolio originally, and now I'm looking 10 years out with my Roth. And how much I can grow that to, and the reality is I don't need it. I mean, I don't need it now, so why would I'm going to need it there? So at some point, I'm just growing numbers to grow numbers to see where I can take it.
I want to ask you some more questions about the Roth IRA. How do people invest in IRAs, and what's the point of that? So I made some list of questions here, and I kind of wanted to go through them with you. Looking back, we talked about on the previous podcast about some of the mistakes that you've made. A lot of us made them. I made a lot of them. Looking forward ahead, I know you can't predict what the market's going to do. But do you think about it still? Do you think about, like, all right, how can I protect myself to avoid the same mistakes I made before, if the worst case happens in, a couple through 3 years?
If I could wind the clock back to where I started, I would have, I would have learned and studied property management a whole lot better early on. And knowing that would have helped me make a lot less mistakes, and probably buy a lot less of the wrong kind of property, and really probably shortcut, a lot of the mistakes. And sometimes, you buy what on the surface looks like a great house in a great area, and there's just other things. Like, we had one house that literally had an underground stream underneath it. We've had crazy neighbors that stalked our tenants in properties, and it was no problem with the house, no problem with the neighborhood. We just had a wingnut neighbor that would chase away tenants. So, and in that particular house, we still have that one, and eventually the situation righted itself when that person moved. But it's, you do the best you can, and having better front end knowledge of management, I probably would have worked a whole lot better. I mean, I say that, I mean, but when I was really growing the portfolio, we had subprime financing. A lot of people that were qualified were buying, and I would say there were a lot less A caliber tenants then than there are now. So I don't know. I got where I got, and I made the mistakes I made, and ultimately the mistakes I made helped shape my philosophies going forward. So,
yeah. Well, what do you see what's your prediction of the market in the next couple of years?
I'm in a hot market, and I'm in a state where people are relocating to. So my opinions on this topic may vary wildly from somebody who maybe is in a different type of a city. So, but I mean, I get confronted with this a lot, with looking at eviction moratoriums and foreclosure moratoriums. I've seen our market explode as rates have lowered, and they're what, low twos right now. Which makes it very affordable for people to buy. There's a shortage of inventory. I honestly don't see any problems in my local market for several years. If every one of the percentage of properties is in, well, okay, let me rewind a little bit. I was just at Collective Genius, and we have the John Burns comes there pretty regularly and kind of gives his predictions on the market. And he did a breakdown of the number of loans in some sort of forbearance. And the reality was the stats he's showing is over 50% of them are in forbearance on purpose, not by accident. So his take is over 50% of these loans that are in forbearance literally have the money sitting in the bank as an emergency fund and don't need it. They have the capacity to make the payment. They're just not. I've gotten feedback from that from mortgage brokers that I know, like to trust, where they've been doing refis for people on loans in forbearance, and they're like, well, crap, they get it all the way down, and they're like, wait, your loan's in forbearance, we can't do a refi. Oh, I'll just write a check and catch it up. And there's a lot of that going on where they're just strategically in forbearance, not from a distress standpoint.
So the other half, is that a much higher than normal number?
Sorry, say that again.
So half of the loans that are in forbearance, the homeowners have the money set aside. The other half, is that a scary number? Is that much higher than normal?
I wish I was looking at the slide, but I mean, basically you had this entire pie that got cut down to about 25% or maybe even less of the people that really are in distress and probably can't, maybe don't necessarily have enough equity to get out. But in my local market, since COVID started, I'm under contract right now on a rental that we had. And early this year, I was thinking we were going to sell that for like 250, 260. And then it looked like, maybe we're probably going to do like 270. And we gave it a little bit of love, and we're under contract at 320. I'm waiting to clear to close. And this is the same house in the same neighborhood in less than 1 calendar year. So our market has gone up at a faster pace than what people's mortgage payments would be accumulating if they weren't paying them. So if government subsidies doesn't allow them to put the payments on the back end of the loan, which is really what I see is going to happen. They're not just going to say, okay, write us a $30,000 check, and they're not going to be able to do that. They know they're not going to do that. So they're going to probably most likely do workouts and dump those on the back end of the loan. And we're going to see smooth sailing really until we see more of a real estate debt crisis. Which we had in 2008 from the subprime meltdown, and we didn't have prior to that until the S&L crisis in the late 80s, early 90s. And if you stretch that window, and there's what is the other book I just The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, and I mean they track real estate cycles on an 18-year window, not a recession cycle on a 7-year window. So anyway, I don't know, but I think locally, we're good. I think a lot of markets are good. I think if you're in a high bubble, I thought New York was going to fall on its face, and I've just been reading things where New York is starting to come back. So, I haven't got a clue. I think what we do in residential real estate is so microeconomic that you could have one part of your city is in huge distress and others are booming. So I think you got to pay attention to what's going on in your market. I use some local market trackers. I use some national market trackers. I look at some basic stuff. I use a little housing tool. I pay attention to John Burns. And I try to make up my assessment based on what the heck's going on in my market. But would I buy another rental today? Hell yeah. Even as hot as I think the market is right now, if I could get good terms on it, I would probably buy as many as I could right now.
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy. You hear these dire predictions and projections in some parts of the media, but you talk to the boots on the ground people that are active in the business. It's like, we don't see it yet. Right. So it's kind of is the can just being kicked down the road? Who knows, right? But if we're buying, would you agree with this? If we're staying true to our fundamentals, the fundamentals of cash flow for one, then we should be fine, right? And the other thing I love about real estate, maybe you can talk about this too, compared to the stock market, cryptocurrencies, they can turn on a dime, right? Like just overnight, they're down. Real estate is much slower. It gives you a lot more time to fix and adjust and correct. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but I also you have a physical asset that, when you look at all the benefits of the property, equity is only one part of it. Income is only one part of it. And I'm going to let me go back to this house I just mentioned I have under contract. I bought that house in 2007. I bought it subject to, so it had little to no equity when I bought it. When I sell that house, we're going to walk with over 200 grand. So did I make, in 2008, somebody could say, Mike, you're an idiot. You just bought a house in 2007. It's never going to come back. I mean, the reality was the income was there. The equity vaporized for a while, and I don't know Bitcoin. I mean, I look at the charts and like, wow, neat. I look at Tesla, I look at Apple. I mean, but I also worked for a company, before I got into real estate, where all my stock options were basically worthless at the time of execution. So like, I can manipulate real estate. If the market tanks, I can just hold it longer, and eventually it's going to come back to the curve, the inflation curve. And it's going to, I mean, if I take over a loan, if I create a loan, if I qualify for a loan, there's one thing that we can hold true. It's going to pay down. And you can put the numbers into a financial calculator and realize whether I ill-timed the market, I still have the benefits of amortization. I still have the long-term benefits of inflation. And if you're not trying to be a day trader,
yeah.
And I don't think anybody should try to be a day trader in real estate. I don't think anybody should try to be a day trader in stocks. I mean, you should look for value, buy the best house or the best stock you can, and manage it well and hold on for the long term.
So if you had $100,000 and you wanted to do something with it,
mm-hmm.
would you go buy a property free and clear with cash, or would you go buy 2 or 3 properties with down payments?
Let me ask you this, and I'm going to lead to my answer, but how much money has the Fed printed in less than a year?
Oh, probably more than it has in a long, long time. A lot.
So what happens when they print money?
Well, I don't understand all this, but I think inflation.
I mean, it devalues our currency, and right, it does create inflation. And they're like, oh, we're trying to get things 2%. 2% once you take food, gas, and housing out of the equation. If you add those back in, it's probably nearly double that. So, I mean, just take your market, take any market, and study back far enough. Like, look at census data. That's easy to get. You don't have a subscription, and you can Google that. You can find a basic market, and you look, okay, 1940, here is the housing price index, and here it is now. And if you draw a line, it's probably in just about any market about 3.7, 3.8% inflation. You can call it appreciation, you can call that speculative, but I mean, I would say history's on our side in that case. So, you can kind of count on inflation in most houses, in most markets. Now, I mean, St. Louis, I know you guys have houses that you can probably still buy for under 100 grand. I mean, and that's retail in those neighborhoods. Now, I'm not referring to those houses, unfortunately. Those, like, if you look at the national median house, it's over 300,000 right now. I would want houses that are in the middle of the market, that do go up in value. I don't want I don't want 1% a month houses or 2% a month houses. I want high growth houses over the long haul. I want the best house in the best neighborhood with the best schools that a tenant can afford, which means the rent that the property will generate will support all the costs of ownership. And I don't want the cheapest one with the highest income factor. I want the one with the biggest growth factor. Yeah.
Interesting. So, okay, let's just use St. Louis. Let's say the median home price in the entire area of St. Louis is $200,000. That's the median home price.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy homes right now at retail for 80, 90. that
Mhm.
have that high rental yield in it, right? Because
Mhm. Mhm.
but you're also, that's a lower quality area. You're going to get a lower quality tenant, more maintenance, more management. So if let's say the median home price in the entire St. Louis metro area is $200,000, you want to be at that $200,000 price range?
I'd want to be probably 160 to 220 is kind of where I want. I mean, right
Okay.
where the median is, that's kind of where I want to be. Like, you know, you can say the numbers don't make as much sense as the ones on the low end, but I mean, the people that make comments like that are only like taking the consideration of income. That's the only factor they look at. They don't look at depreciation. They don't look at amortization. They don't look at growth. And if you stack all those benefits, the median price point house will just eat its lunch over time. In the short term, the income looks stronger. But I mean, you get the higher dollar portfolio, you get the depreciation that shields your income. So you can actually, without working any harder, make more income because of tax advantages. You know, like, let's just basic math, and like, nobody understands what a lease option is or creative finance, and they don't know you can take over payments, and you're tethered with a 10 Freddie Fannie loan limit. Like, if that's your limit, I'd want to get the most. I would want to borrow the absolute most money I possibly could from Freddie and Fannie on those 10 loans, which is what is the limit right now? Just under 500,000. Maybe it just crested 500,000. So I could effectively borrow upwards of $5 million of debt from the government on 30-year fixed rates, and in the threes right now. Like, I would much rather do that, assuming the tenants can afford the properties that I'm borrowing the money on. Because I mean, if I have the 1% houses, I'm probably going to have, you know, like on 10 of them, what am I going to have? 800,000? Like, no thanks. If you're going to use debt. More is better, assuming the assets will afford themselves.
Okay, interesting. Now, talk about subject twos, because you just mentioned most banks will only allow you to have about 10 loans on properties. Now you can convert them to commercial loans, and that's a whole nother subject, but
Yeah.
you probably reached a point where you're like, I can't get traditional bank financing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So you started buying homes creatively. Talk about what a subject to is for somebody who doesn't know. And what do you like about subject twos?
What I like about subject to is effectively, you know, subject to is just lingo. It's, we're buying a property subject to an existing loan, or pretty much subject to any and all existing liens and encumbrances on the property. So what we're doing is we're buying it, meaning title transfers from seller to buyer, and the loan isn't getting paid off. And usually that's a situation where they're lower equity. Usually it's a situation where they're an owner occupant, or they're an accidental landlord that didn't want to, you know, tried renting it out, because they had to move away, and things aren't going so well. But ultimately it's an owner occupied loan. They're usually lower interest rate than investor loans. You know, right now, I think this morning I saw you can get an owner occ loan 2.2%. Now I am doing a couple of refis on some subject to properties right now, and they're at 3.6%.
So are you refinancing them into your name, or is the owner refinancing them in their name?
I'm refinancing these into my name.
Okay.
And my wife's name. Yeah, we've had them over 10 years. There's massive equity, and like, some of these loans are 5.5 and 6.5%. And, you know, they made sense when we bought them. The rent was still higher than the debt service, but now, like, money is so bleeping cheap, and I can sort of refi this many and pay off debt on this many. So we're just, again, I do believe we're going to have an inflationary market for a long time coming. And if you look at that, I'd rather have as much cheap debt right now as I can, because I'm going to be paying it all back in deflated dollars over time. So,
okay. So buying a house subject to is when you take over the mortgage. Mm-hmm. The loan stays in the seller's name, but now you take title to the property.
Correct.
Now some people look at that and think, man, that's kind of risky, isn't it? Like, you don't have much equity. You're not getting much cash flow.
It's risky if you're a bad manager. It's
Great
risky.
point.
It's incredibly risky if you're a bad manager. It's incredibly risky if you don't have cash reserves to solve a problem that you have. It's incredibly risky if you don't really know what you're doing and you go about trying to do that business half-cocked. And there's a lot of people that are better at marketing and getting leads than they are at like all the granular details of making sure that you do it right and you protect yourself and you protect the seller. And you better own it like it's your own loan. Because people have gotten into trouble, in some cases gone to jail because they have mismanaged the properties, handled the situation poorly, and let houses go to foreclosure, let them go back to the bank, and didn't try to do any kind of workouts or give them back to the former owners or you're going to hear a lot of people say that's illegal, don't do it. I mean, if you do it right, it's a fantastic business, and you're able to help people that no other investor or not many other people are even trying to do in your neighborhood. I mean, I happen to be in a military town, and we have 5 different military installations, and they're getting 100% financed VA loans on nice properties. And then the government says, you got to go, and they may not have enough equity to sell the traditional way. And, what am I going to offer them? 70 cents on the dollar for their beautiful house in a nice neighborhood with 0 repairs. I mean, if that's the only tool I got in my toolbox, I can't help that person. And I can help them if I know how to manage the property effectively and know how to buy it subject to.
So let's talk about your criteria today then on a subject to deal.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it's worth 300,000 and they owe 295 on it. Maybe you give us the typical numbers on an example.
Well, I mean, I've done that. Okay. I'm not lying, but I like a little bit of spread in there, but the reality is the loan on that 295 loan is paying down 5,000-6,000 a year. That 300,000, that's going to go up 9,000 to 20 right now, 30,000, 40,000 a year. But I mean, if I just use inflation numbers, it's going up, and ultimately, let's say I theoretically could wholesale that for 15 grand. Okay, then I pay. If I'm a wholesaler, I'm probably paying high taxes on that. And whatever's left, I got to pay for the cost of my marketing. I mean, ultimately, you're not making all that much. You're really not. Whereas you buy it subject to, and you don't have spendable money, but you've got a growth factor, and you have an amortization factor and a depreciation factor, and you're doing. You're getting at least $20,000, if not $30,000 per year of benefit from that property that has 0 equity.
20 to 30,000. I hope you guys are understanding this. Like, rewind this if you need to. If you don't catch what Michael's saying here, It may not have much equity, but you're paying down the principal, right? It's appreciating, and you get some tax write-offs, right? And you're looking at, if you were to wholesale it, you might make, your gross wholesale profit might be 15 grand, but your net after the end of the day might be only 5,000. You're making more than that by just holding on to it through the principal pay down, through the appreciation, and through the tax write-offs. And so over the long haul, it's a really great game.
It's a great game, assuming you have a business that's providing you income along the way.
Okay, so let's talk about that though, the income.
Yeah,
because you're absolutely right. Like, you can get in big trouble in this subject to game, any kind of buying property and owning property game, if you don't have the right property management in place and you're not treating it like a business.
Yes, and often this business gets sold as a beginner strategy with no or low money down. And the worst is when people teach you how to borrow money against them and pull out cash. And that is a really bad idea.
We know somebody from your neck of the woods who used to teach that.
Yes, he's not the only one. A lot of people have taught that, because it's you got to make it sexy, man. You got to make a product, and and the reality is it's not sexy. It's like, I remember the first 5 years my wife and I were doing this. Like, she's running this whole management company that effectively made no money. It just broke even. And, we had to be, wholesalers and fix and flippers to have the money to live on and to pay the bills and to do the marketing to build the rental portfolio. And now,
okay, so these homes that you buy, then you're not getting much cash flow, if anything, on them, right?
not initially, not in the first 5 years. No, I mean, they cover their costs. You're getting the benefits. You get I mean, again, I did the flipping over here so I could do the buy and hold over here. The buy and hold over here provided me tons of tax shelter for the flipping over here. So I could flip half as much over here because I could keep all of it as opposed to paying huge amounts of tax. Wow, I could pay no tax legally, morally, ethically, and because of this. So did it pay us? Yeah. I mean, it paid us because we had this as well. If we just did this, I would have needed a job, and my wife would have needed a job for this to percolate for the 5 years to do that.
So talk about the depreciation side of things that you just talked about.
Sure.
Are you taking accelerated depreciation on these homes, or
no? I mean, there's goods and bads about it, but a buddy of mine calls it "don't let the tail wag the dog." And when you take this accelerated depreciation up front, you kind of create yourself where, crap, if that's a property I do want to sell, and let me go back to the house I'm selling right now because that's what's on my radar. Like, that's not a house I want to own forever. It's not in the right neighborhood to own forever. And I don't want to be stuck with like, crap, I don't want to sell that because I'm going to have to repay or recapture all the depreciation, which basically, if you've taken, say, $60,000 of depreciation on the property, you've got to repay that at a 25% bracket.
Yeah.
Okay. Plus your capital gain.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, well, let me find another property. Well, what am I going to find right now that I can 1031 into to avoid those taxes? I don't know. I might not make the best decision. Okay. And I just see a lot of people that because of the tax situation make a bad decision on a replacement property. And I just don't want to be able to make, I mean, I'm literally going to pay the tax on this because I'm not real optimistic on where tax rates or, capital gain rates are going to be in the future. And I don't want to be stuck with an even bigger problem later. So I'm just going to pay the tax. So
explain that you're not taking any depreciation, or you're just doing a normal depreciation schedule.
Normal depreciation cycle. So we don't componentize anything. And so it's 27 and a half years on the improvements. So
on a $30,000 house, on a $300,000 house, how much is that about a year? Would you?
Sure. Let's do the math. Okay. Let's take $300,000 house times 0.8. Why 0.8? I'm just taking 20% for the land. This is basic accounting. Like in some places you could justify the land's worth less, but let's 240,000 in improvements divided by 27.5. So there's $8,727 in benefit. Now, if I'm in the let's say 35% tax bracket. So that's $3,054 of taxes this year I don't have to pay.
Which is good.
Right.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. So times 100, that's pretty decent money, that you don't have to pay tax on. So,
yeah. Okay. So,
even times 10, it's pretty good.
I can't emphasize this enough. What you're saying is so good. If you have the right property management in place, I want to ask you about property management tips. And then I want to ask you about, what kind of advice would you give to a beginner who's listening to this and is like, this sounds good. I'm a little overwhelmed, confused, but like, how would I get started to go down that path? So talk about property management tips. Like, your wife's amazing because she's managing all of these properties. And I know you well enough. I don't know you that well, but I know you well enough. Like, you're a lot like me, chasing shiny objects, and, you love chasing the deal, and you love sales, and but having somebody on your team like that is amazing. So talk about some property management tips. Somebody's just getting started in the business and they're starting to buy properties, but they want to they're listening to you and say, all right, I want to take property management seriously, what do you do?
I mean, my best advice is go learn from David Tilney.
David Tilney.
David Tilney, TILNEY.com. He teaches. I mean, a lot of my mentors said, the easiest thing to manage is a detached single family house, and anything other than that is harder. I mean, a duplex, harder, a fourplex, harder, an apartment building, harder. Does it mean it's too hard? No, it's harder than a detached single family house. So, I mean, and that is David's forte. So, as a wholesaler, which I have been, we're looking for houses typically. So it just goes right along with what we're already shopping for. So, I guess some of the guys now are wholesaling duplexes and quads, and maybe that's bigger in different areas. But, ultimately, I was always looking for houses. I was wholesaling houses. So I bought the wrong small multis when I started. So I realized I don't want any more of those. They were way different tenant demographics, and the houses were always so much easier and so much less hassle. And so
you still prefer to this day, single family homes?
Absolutely. Because I'm not solely income focused, I want all the benefits, and part of the benefit I want is the growth factor of it. Now, granted, locally, our fourplexes here have grown astronomically, so maybe I missed the mark on that one. Because we were buying those after the collapse in the ones, and now they're in the 4s to 6s, and I probably should have, but didn't. I just stuck with what I liked.
Well, do you feel like single family homes are better long-term play?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to get burnout at management, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know landlords that have been managing houses for 30, 40, 50 years, and they're still doing it. I don't know anybody that's managed fourplexes that long. Most of the time, the people that I started in fourplexes moved up to apartments, and then at some point you can exchange up and get into bigger apartments where you can get real, commercial, smart, property managers that know how to manage those assets. And like any huge player, they're not self-managing that stuff. I mean, they run it like a business, and part of the business is we got to have the right management on the ground in that market. So,
yeah. And you still got to wonder though, at the end of the day, after they look at their net number and their return on time and the return on their money, are they really doing that much better in the big, large multi-apartment, units versus what they could be doing with a single family home?
So this is my philosophy, and I know some apartment guys that are going to dwarf my net worth. So I mean, yeah, you can go bigger, faster with apartments, and I would never argue contrary. But I have some good friends in property management, and one of the things he says is it's managing the tenants isn't the hard part; it's managing the owners. He's like, they're the biggest pain in the ass. And I can only imagine what people that are putting their money into apartment syndications are like. They're probably pains in the ass. Sorry. Am I allowed to say that on a podcast? I mean, maybe they're not. I don't know. I'm just, that wasn't my aspiration. So, but there's management. Like whether it's a tenant, whether it's an owner, whether it's an equity partner, or somebody that's putting it does require management. So you may not be managing the tenants on the ground with an apartment, but you are managing something.
So somebody just getting started, would you encourage them to? I mean, I'm looking at David Tilney's website right now, David Tilney, TILNEY.com. It looks like he has a property management course, right?
Yes.
And he has this thing called hassle-free property management, master leasing, and 3 power pack days. Well, anyway, something like that.
Yep.
Somebody who is getting started, starting to buy some houses, do you recommend that they manage in-house, hire an assistant, manage your own properties, or find a good property?
I think when you're small, absolutely. I mean, you if you get to know the business and you don't want to do it, you can always outsource it in some capacity. I don't know if we talked about it last time, but like at one point we had 102 houses and my wife said she didn't want any more. She didn't want to hire any more employees. She didn't want to scale that. So I found management by partnering with other people that had the skill set. So, a lot of the subject to deals in my market don't have enough gap in, income to PITI, the debt service, to afford a manager. So you can't scale that without scaling a monthly negative. So how do I get somebody to manage for free? Give them a piece of the pie. So, I did that with my Roth IRA. I did that with another partnership. At this point, like my portfolio is mature that we could outsource management at some point. And our original goal was to have, 30 free and clears. I don't think we're going to get that small, but because my wife does like having employees and she does want to maintain enough bounds to justify, at some point, the fee you could pay a fee manager that's good is less than what you pay for an in-house employee. So, there's a balance there where we're probably going to maintain a certain portfolio size just to justify having an employee. So we can do it our way. We do, last time Tilney did his seminar, my wife and both our employees were sitting on a Zoom call watching the seminar together. And every time they go, we kind of move the management ball down the field and we get a little more streamlined and get a little better at what we're doing. So,
yeah. Do you think somebody could manage a group of 20, 25 properties with a virtual assistant?
Easily. I don't think you need a virtual assistant. Dude, I was as idiotic and had no business systems. And I had probably 23 to 25 houses before on my own while I was doing wholesaling. And granted, I wasn't doing full on fix and flips then. I was doing either wholesale or wholetail. And it wasn't until my wife joined me that, that we actually did full on rehabs. But
okay.
If you do, and I did not know who David Tilney was then. If I had his systems, I think I could have easily done probably 40 to 60 by myself and still been a wholesaler on the side.
That's amazing. So, there's been a ton of advancements with software, property management tools online. Everything's online now.
Yeah.
Are there some online tools that you guys use and recommend?
Buildium is our primary management software.
Buildium?
Yeah, Buildium. And Appfolio is another similar one. And there's others, but like Buildium seems to meet our needs as an owner manager. And then we use, we had Podio built out, thanks to you. I think we originally got Podio set up using your Podio apps. And then because we had Podio, Lori kind of built out her own Podio, both property maintenance side and also from the rehab side.
Yeah.
And then we have all our, contractors and subcontractors that aren't employees. They have access and they're all do whatever they do through all that stuff that goes through Podio, which I have no clue on. I like,
yeah.
I used to have like over here, I used to have stacks of paper. That was my CRM. I had like high priority leads, medium priority leads, and slow follow up leads. And I've bought over 1,000 houses in my market like that.
That's how I started too. Yeah, and I wanted to just touch real quick on what we talked about before too. You've got in the past you used you do more rent to owns, but you had found today, listen, it's better to get a good quality tenant because you're going to have less maintenance requests and they're going to stay longer. Right?
Yeah.
So what are some of your criteria today for if you have a vacancy, what are some of your criteria looking for good tenants?
That's a good question. We have basic criteria on our website. Let me see if I can pull it up. I can tell you. There's obviously the income requirement. You got to look at, just like if somebody was qualifying for a mortgage, they have to be signing up for a house that's easily affordable. Do you know what I mean? If there's, and I mean, don't ask me the percentages because I don't know, honestly, right off the top of my head. I can pull it off our website, but if you're qualifying for a mortgage, they won't let you spend more than a certain percentage of your income on the payment. And it's the same thing for a tenant. Like if they're house poor, at some point, a flat tire on their car is a financial hardship. So, they have to be able to easily afford the house. They have to have, good job, history, meaning they don't job hop. They are in the same field. One of my mentors, Jack Miller, used to say, poverty is created from job hopping and moving all the time. And it's just that occasional gap in one's income can create a lot of financial hardship over the years, and to the point where people just can't get on the right side of the curve. So, people that stick with their jobs, that have strong ties to the community, typically husband, wife, 2 kids, dog, good school district. That's who stays, the longest amount of time. And part of it is have the right house that's big enough for them to move all their crap in and stay the rest of their life. We then, when we have a vacancy, we typically do move somebody up nearly to market. If you look at our entire rent roll, we probably are on average about 9% below market value. So that said, they can't shop us and go get a better deal elsewhere. So, there's a fine line between undercharging, and like losing money and revenue that you could get versus, charging top dollar and having higher turnover because they're always looking to move to get a better deal someplace. So I'm not telling you we know, like I know from like really investors that are very long in the tooth, they tend to, like, the older you are in the game and the longer you've had the properties, the people like that want less and less management charge less and less below market rent because they have less and less turnover, and the less turnover they have, they have less maintenance, they have less everything. Like one of my mentors said, they still have orange shag carpet in one of their rentals. And whenever the tenant complains about the orange shag carpet, they're like, absolutely no problem. Go pick out whatever carpet you want. And based on whatever you want, we'll just make an adjustment in the rent. And they never have replaced the carpet because it's not that bad. We'll just put a throw rug down.
Well, it's amazing. The huge difference, just $50 to $100 a month in the rent can get in the quality of tenant and length of time that they stay there.
Even just in the quality of the applicant. Just advertising a rate that's $50 less than what most people are asking is huge. And both the quantity of applicants you get and the quality of applicants.
Yeah. Even if you're, I see people do this where they're pushing the rent, they're trying to get as high as rent as possible. Just one extra month of vacancies wipes out all of that little extra rent that you're trying to get. It's better to underprice your rent just a little bit to fill it faster and get more better quality applicants.
Well, there's real numbers when you have, we were talking about cost sag and depreciating some items of the property quicker. And I mean, carpet does depreciate quicker. And when you have an apartment and you have higher turnover, that's a real expense. So if you can keep somebody in the house longer and not replace carpet every 5 years, like you're having a huge, that's huge numbers to your bottom line. So, as I said, you're kind of in this together with your tenants. Like, we can't have rental property without providing benefits to the tenant. And for doing that, here's somebody that their family goes to work for 50% of the month to give us money to pay for our assets. Like it can't be one-sided where it's all our benefit. We have the benefit of depreciation and amortization and long-term inflationary growth on the value of the properties in exchange for sacrificing the use. We give the use to the tenant, and the tenant's job is to be a good steward of the asset, maintain or improve the property, to get along with the neighbors and pay the rent on time. And for that, we treat them like adults. We don't micromanage them like children. And, ideally, we leave them alone. They leave us alone. And again, these are my philosophies that I've adopted from David Tilney, Jack Miller, from John Schaub. A lot of guys that have taught this business for longer than, many multiples of the time I've been in the business.
Yeah,
so.
Nice, man. This is, guys, I hope you're picking up the gold nuggets here, because these are really, really good. I got a couple more questions for you, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about IRAs. Cool. Self-directed IRAs. Can you explain what the benefit of that is? Just briefly. I think most people know. And explain this to somebody who's maybe has a small IRA or just getting started. Like, how do they use that? How can they grow it?
Cool. And remind me to share some resources too in that department as well. So when I worked for corporate America, I went in, I had a salary, and one of my benefits of the job was I had a company 401k plan. And that's a long-term retirement plan where I could go in and say, oh, based on my risk tolerance, I can go in and pick some mutual funds and crap like that. And, I had a certain selection of things I could pick to invest in inside the 401k. After I'm no longer at my corporate job or outside of my corporate job, I could create my own self-directed IRA account. So it doesn't mean I'm going to go to Charles Schwab. I'm going to go to, like, initially I started with, there was a local trust custodian in our town that allowed us to invest in real estate via a retirement account. So I had my rollover IRA account from corporate America, and I rolled it over to first a traditional IRA at the self-directed custodian. So now, instead of having mutual funds in there, I just have basically an account, a money market account that sits there until I direct it to do something. And with my IRA, I tend to not want to own real estate. I want to own notes and or options. Like, I don't want to be in title. I don't want to have to manage anything. I just want to be more of a passive investor in this capacity.
Explain why that is.
Well, you can't self-deal, for one. So I can't provide services or value to an investment that my IRA is participating in. So let's rewind. Okay, after I figured out the game, like, I think the first class I went to, like, I fumbled around and I did some good stuff. I did some bad stuff. I tried to be an equity participation on some flips, and some went good, some didn't go good. But I went to a class by Pete Fortunato and Dykes Bodiford, and they where is it? Somewhere over here, self-directed IRA class. And basically Dykes does a really good job at scaring the bejesus out of you, and with all the rules. And then Pete Fortunato, who is like, you're silly if you don't go learn from this guy. Whoever's listening to this, Pete has been teaching this for 50 years, I think, and amazing guy. But he teaches you how to navigate the waters. I mean, especially from a creative finance standpoint. So he can be hard to understand if you don't really, like, a lot of it goes over your head initially, and a lot of it went over my head. And I knew that about Pete because I've been to some of his other seminars. I'm like, all right, I want to go get one thing that me, as a marketer, as a guy that's a deal junkie and churning a lot of volume to market, I want to do one thing that I can take back and replicate over and over and over. So, one of the techniques for self-directed IRAs is creating a wrap environment. And I don't like wraps, and that's we could digress on a whole series of podcasts over that. But I'm like, I know how to find a subject to deal. Basically I know how to put that transaction together. And I also know people as well that I've coached and trained and know, like, and trust in my local environment. So initially my IRA found one of those opportunities. It's funny how the IRAs can find things like that, but yeah. My IRA found an opportunity like that. And it was basically it was in the recession. I bought a $115,000 house subject to a $112,000 first mortgage, and the seller needed $2,000 to move. So my IRA went to contract to buy that property subject to and provide $2,000 to the seller. I then called a friend of mine who knows the subject to business and is a property manager, managed his own rentals. And I said, hey, and this is another concept I got from Pete. Like, I can't lend, Joe, you probably wouldn't want to borrow my money at 66%, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm positive. Yeah.
Okay. But if I said, hey, Joe, I have a free house, you can have it. I'm going to provide all the money. All you got to do is just manage it for a few years. And when we sell it, we'll split the profits. Sounds a little nicer, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. So I called my friend and I said, hey, you want to manage this house? And he's like, hell yeah. So we bought that house. I assigned my contract. He basically ended up borrowing the $2,000 in
So you
second.
lent him the 2,000.
Well, yeah, basically, I lent it against the property.
Okay.
In second position behind the loan that we were taking over subject to. So he owned it. He managed it. He got the depreciation during ownership. And a few years later, the house went up over $200,000. He had to put a little bit of fix up into it. After he paid himself back for the fix up, paid himself a commission to sell it. He was licensed as well. And basically we split the profits. My $2,000 investment turned into about $70,000 investment. And based on the duration that we owned it, that was a compounded 66 and change percent ROI, compounded ROI on that $2,000 investment.
Yeah, but not bad.
So
tax free. So you can't self deal in an IRA, which means you can't manage it yourself. You have to hire a property manager.
I had to hire somebody to do it. And instead of hiring somebody to do it, and basically losing money every month because the property management fee is on top of the PITI and on ongoing maintenance and other things like that, I would be negative. So in this case, I eliminated the property management fee. I eliminated property management in general, and I basically just became an equity lender on the property.
So do you do that on all of your deals inside of your IRA now?
Yeah, I've been advised, like John Heyer doesn't like low dollar things like that. He's like, there needs to be some financial substance or rationale for investing in the deal. And I'll give him credit for that. So now I tend to do more capital invested. So it looks, it's more of a real investment. I mean, there's an argument that's like, if Freddie and Fannie wouldn't lend over 80% on a loan and I'm lending it darn near 100%, aren't I taking a lot higher risks? And shouldn't I have a much higher, reward threshold? I think so. But again, just to cut, like there's some fairly significant numbers in my Roth at this point. I don't want to play any games. So I like the last one I did, I put in $10,000 and most of them are somewhere between 10 and maybe 25 or something like that.
So you'll lend, you'll put 10 to 20 grand into the deal. You'll find a friend to manage it for you.
More or less. Yep. Financial friends locally in my market.
Do you ever just lend like hard money lend or bridge loans or lend to other investors on deals?
I'd consider it, but mostly I don't want to replace being a house flipper and a wholesaler with another job. I don't want to be a hard money lender where I'm constantly looking to place it and get it back and place it and get it back. And I like being an equity lender because those deals, I make a loan and they just sit there quietly for years. And when they pop, they're, and then I do have to scramble a little bit and get the money back out there. But,
do you ever just put your money into a syndication or, a big fund?
I have recently. That's new to me though. That's somebody that I've known for, probably 8 years, and somebody that has been in that business, in the fund business for many, many years longer than that. But
got to be somebody you trust. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So we got to wrap this up, Michael. This has been really, really good. Cool. Let's talk about advice. Something, what would you tell beginners as they're getting started? They're not looking for the get rich quick, make a quick nickel. They want to make a slow dime. and they want to build wealth over the long haul. What would you recommend them to start doing today?
Learn management,
Okay.
and then go look for asset. Like once you have a good management system, it's easy to dump assets into that system, as opposed to, oh, now I got an asset, let me go figure out how to manage it. You're kind of always behind the 8 ball in the sense that like you're always trying to figure out what you needed to know before you got the asset. So I would encourage people to learn management first, and adopt those philosophies, because it's a whole lot easier to build systems as you go when you start with 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And if you do things right when you're young, you can scale quicker, you can scale faster, and you can scale better, and you don't have to go back and constantly reinvent the wheel. Like when we started, we had no system, and that evolved to some systems and an Excel spreadsheet, and then that evolved to a real basic property management software, and then that evolved to building them. So every time there was, like for us, so we had a learning curve, and we had to get data transferred, and if you could just wind it back up, start like you're going to run it like a business, start out with a good management class, start out with a good management platform that will scale as big as you want to go, then you're going to save yourself a lot of time, energy, and effort, and banging your head later. Are you going to have higher costs on the front end? Yes. Like, oh, I don't want to get that because it's such and such dollars per month, but you're way better to pay it now and build your foundation around that, because then you can scale so much quicker, and then the cost of that software is it's irrelevant.
All right. So you take a good property management class, you get the good systems and software and all that. Then what? How do you find
as you scale? I mean, if you want to scale, how do you scale anything? You got to scale relationships. You got to scale some mechanism for creating offers. And that's either, I hate to say it, I haven't listened to a lot of your podcasts lately, but I assume, I know from your history, you've done a lot of direct marketing, you've done a lot of online marketing, and I did a ton of that stuff to make my phone ring, because unless I'm talking about real estate, I'm very introverted. Like, I don't want to knock on doors. I don't want to cold call people. I want people calling me.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I did tons of direct mail, pay-per-click, SEO, blah, 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 all that other crap, to get my phone to ring, and then, make offers that way. So,
well, would you say maybe you need to learn how to do some more of the creative type of deals, like subject to?
I think it depends on your market. I mean, in my market, absolutely. In Southern California, like in higher dollar markets, you better absolutely learn creative finance. In Collective Genius, there's a young guy there. And he's got over, I haven't really talked to him in a couple of years, but he's got like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rental properties that he basically buys. They're basically shells. He buys them. He basically guts them, completely redoes them, and basically refinances them, and does the BRRR thing on a next level. I mean, his market in Pennsylvania, he has the ability to replicate that. That's not something I have the ability to replicate. So I have higher dollar houses that have higher growth, that I need to learn how to creatively finance my way in if I want to keep growing that. Whereas he just had a whole nonstop conveyor. I mean, granted, he still has to work to find them, but he could just find these BRRs and scale that. So I think what are successful people doing in your market, from an acquisition and a financing, and try to replicate that in your market. I can tell you what's worked for me, but maybe that's not a good fit for your market.
You had mentioned John Schwab's book. It's a really good book. I'm looking at it right there. It's Building Wealth. I'm not looking at it right there. It was right there. Anyway, Building Wealth One House at a Time. Yeah. Right. And that would be a good book for people to start.
Absolutely. That's a great beginner book. I've reread that a couple of times, being that I'm not a beginner anymore, and there's always good nuggets in there. So I think learning from people like John Schwab, learning management from David Tilney. Jack Miller is no longer with us, but he was one of the most creative minds out there. And in cashflowdepot.com is, I think you can now pay $1 price, and you get a lifetime membership, and like courses I used to buy from Jack are now on there for free. So, Jack was Jack, man. It was like part of it was a seminar, part of it was a stand-up comedy routine, and like the mistake would be to look at this guy in his 1970s looking J.C. Penney's suit and think you're never going to learn anything from this guy, and he's absolutely brilliant guy. And without Jack Miller, Pete Fortunato, and John Schaub, and also Jimmy Napier, who's no longer with us, those guys really started the whole creative real estate movement. And anybody that's teaching this stuff has probably learned it from them or somebody that learned it from them. So anyway, go to the sources.
Cashflowdepot.com is the website you talked about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of other stuff. There's another guy on there that you should study, Mike Cantu, out of Southern California. He's got a super, Mike's my hero. He's always had a real super lean and mean operation. And here's a guy in, Southern California who flips 50 houses a year and has, 40 some rental properties. I think most of them are paid off at this point. He didn't have a care for anything. So, I mean, you can do it in any market. And I think if you tried to do the BRRR model in California, you'd have a harder time. Did I lose you, Joe? You're frozen on my end. You were frozen there. I didn't hear anything if you said something. I'll text him. Maybe he is.
Michael.
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So sorry about that.
No worries.
We're recording again, and we're live back on YouTube. So hopefully, I just had one more question for you, Michael.
Cool.
You mentioned the resources about IRAs.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share some of those resources you were given?
I think one of the, like, to grow a small IRA, there's a gentleman, Walter Wolford, and it's just his name, Walter Wolford, WOFFORD.com. He is a ninja at the small dollar IRA thing. In fact, I think he has a package where you can buy like 7 different seminars for incredibly cheap. But he teaches the concepts. And Walter's kind of a hub of a lot of incredibly gifted investor minds that kind of all kind of go to his events.
What would his website be again?
I think it's walterwolford.com. Or
knowledgeismoney.net. Would that be it?
No, I think it's just his name. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can.
Walter, WOFFORD.
Yeah, maybe try Google in case the spelling is. Maybe I'm spelling it wrong. Walter.
Yes, here it is. You're right.
Okay.
WALTER, Walter Wolford, WOFFORD.
Yep. Yeah. So he's an old Jack Miller guy, and I think he made plenty of money, and when he had plenty of money, he started growing his his IRAs and became quite the ninja at that. And he teaches a lot with Quincy Long, who owns Quest IRA Services. So Quincy is, kind of the, I guess I told you I went to the Dykes and Pete seminar, but Dykes sort of sounds like an attorney, like from the granular level of information. And
Okay.
Quincy is kind of the, he knows all the rules for self-directed IRAs, and those two as a team. Walter's a creative mind, Quincy is the rule book, and together, they teach a lot of really good concepts on how to navigate. So,
Okay.
if you want to take, what can you put into a Roth IRA? If you're not already exceeding the income requirements, you can only put $5,500 in. So it's not a lot of money to work with. But I gave one example from my portfolio where I used $2,000 to grow it to 70. So that stuff works. I recently did, and when I was actively wholesaling, I never did wholesale deals with my IRA. I didn't want something I was doing as a business venture out of my IRA to do it in my IRA. So, but I'm no longer doing that. So I have stumbled into a wholesale here and there since, and I can do that in my IRA. So, I'm going to put $1,000 out and I'm going to get 15, 20, whatever thousand back. I wouldn't do a bunch of those, but I may do one wholesale a year at this point. So,
Okay.
I'm hard to call me a wholesaler.
Any other resources, IRA resources you might recommend?
Definitely like Dyke's website, assets101.com. He teaches that class with Pete Fortunato once a year, I think. And that's probably coming up in like February, March. I don't know if that's going to be Zoom or not.
I see it right here. Assets101.com. Cool.
Yeah. There's another good seminar, Gary Johnston seminars. He teaches a class called Financial Freedom Principles. And that's kind of learning how to use a financial calculator and learning how to understand the decisions we make in our lives, from how we operate as an employee, as a self-employed person, as a business, or what business entity, and how that impacts our tax situation, our investment situation, like how a different type of plan allows you to put more money in a retirement account. There's a lot of really, anyway, it's a great class. It's probably a class that I will drag my son to kicking and screaming, probably as soon as he's 18 years old. It's just one of those things people need to understand. At any age. And most people that go to Financial Freedom Principles usually reattend, if
Nice.
that makes sense.
Cool. Do you have a favorite IRA company that you like to use?
Right now I'm using a company called Provident. They're low cost, but I have created an LLC that my IRA owns. So Walter would probably tell you to create a trust that your IRA owns and hold it with Quest. I just ended up at Provident, just a referral. They're very cheap. They're just worthless if you want them to do anything in a reasonable amount of time. And I would say that about probably any of them.
Yeah.
Whereas once you create an entity like a trust or an LLC, and then you fund your IRA dollars into it, now you can have a local bank account that, I am the manager of my LLC that I receive zero compensation for, but I can effectively go write a check to get something done in a moment's notice if I need. So a Provident doesn't, I made the move and then I realized I couldn't do a trust. So I did the LLC. But
Okay.
Quest has a really good deal. Quest has a lot more expertise via Quincy Long, and they do a lot of really good resources.
I was just talking to Quest Trust today and getting those details ironed out.
There's Advanta is another one. I think my friend uses Advanta. There's Marissa from Advanta. I wish I had her card handy, but she's a sharp a sharp cat, and I've seen her on some podcasts. But again, I mean, it's like subject to. Don't try to go about this half-cocked. Like, learn what the rules are, learn how to do it right, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot and have them come back and blow up your IRA.
Yeah.
Another good. I might have lent that one. Oh no. If you haven't set up an account yet, Dorsey, Dyke's daughter, wrote this book with Dykes and John Heyer, an attorney, on the solo 401k.
Nice.
And if you have a solo 401k, you can basically create part of it as a traditional environment and part of it as a Roth component. So even if you make too much money to start a Roth, you can create a solo 401k. And there's also benefits of doing it like a Roth 401k versus a traditional Roth IRA. Because in that, my understanding is every transaction is kind of its own thing. So if you do something bad and they slap your hand on one transaction, it's not going to blow up your whole IRA like it would in a Roth IRA.
Interesting.
So
the book is called Solo 401k.
Yeah, the solo 40. Yeah, the solo 401k.
Nice. Okay. Very cool.
So I think that's like $20 book. So like that's a wealth of information and a good foundation for that.
Nice. Super helpful. Awesome call, Michael. Part 1 and part 2. Guys, again, if you haven't heard part 1, go to realestateinvestingmastery.com and check out part 1. We gave a ton of links here, and all of those links are going to be in the show notes. So go to realestateinvestingmastery.com, or a shorter URL is reimpodcast.com, reimpodcast.com. Michael, thank you so much. Do you have a website or an email or a cell phone number somebody can call you?
SwiftResults.com is my website. That's my house buying website. You can hit me up through that, or I guess I'm on Facebook. I'm in your big Facebook group. I'm in several of the big wholesaling groups out there. If I don't know you honestly on Facebook, I'm not one of these guys with 5,000 friends. I actually know most of the people on my friends list, so I probably won't accept a friend invite. But if I can help you, hit me up off my website. I'm a junkie. If I can help you structure a deal, I'm all ears. I'm used to doing a ton of deals, and I'm not that guy anymore, unfortunately. But part of me still wants to be that guy. So if I can help you put a fun, creative transaction together, I'd love to help you out. So
SwiftResults.com.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thank you, Michael, so much. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Joe. It's always fun.
Good. Looking forward to seeing you again soon sometime.
Likewise.
All right, guys. We'll see you all later. Take care, everybody.